Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Genius Talk where we pick the brains of thought leaders from the world of L&D. I'm Apurva, your session host for tonight, and I'm also an L&D marketer from Animaker. For the people who don't know, Animaker is an AI animation platform with over 30 million users across the globe, out of which one-third of them are actually L&D creators. This is the part 2 of our interview with Christy Tucker. She's the learning experience design consultant and also the founder of Simulate Learning. We are going to continue our conversation about scenario-based learning. If you haven't checked out the part 1 of this interview, I highly recommend you all to check it out. I've added the link in the description. So Christy, let's continue with our discussion. While we are talking about creating training materials, the main aim is to make the learner finish the training materials, right? So when it comes to scenario-based learning, while the learners are taking up scenario-based training programs, what if they fail in each and every step of their way? So the more they fail, the more they feel demotivated, and eventually they'll end up not doing the course, and they will not even be willing to move forward, right? So how do you deal with this? Like, how to create a challenging but also a supportive SBL program? Like, how do you deal with such circumstances?
I think that definitely is a problem, because we can have people discouraged. I will say, however, in training, we often err on the side of making things too easy, that they're boring and insulting. And people actually do enjoy being challenged, especially if it's not too hard and too confusing. Now, just like in games where you can level things up, I think there is something about not necessarily starting with the hardest thing. Some of this also depends on who your audience is, right? There's going to be a difference between training salespeople in a real, or cashiers in a retail environment who are maybe doing their very first real job ever, is going to be different in how much support you provide versus doctors who have been through med school and additional training, and you're building on existing skills for them on how to talk to patients, right? These are two very different audiences. So I will say, as a general rule, I don't let learners go make more than 3 decisions on a wrong path that are the worst possible decisions without cutting it off. Even if the whole scenario is 7 or 8 decisions deep, if you make the worst possible decisions, 2 or 3 of those in a row, I will generally cut off that path. So at that point, I will give feedback. I think within a scenario, you don't always need to give very direct instructional feedback of, sorry, that's not the best choice, right? You don't need to always do that coaching. But at a point where someone has made multiple wrong decisions and has gotten to a bad ending, that's when you do in fact need to provide some instructional feedback. You let this problem between your 2 employees go for too long, and it escalated too much before you intervened. Try the scenario again and try to intervene sooner in the process. Or you were talking to your patient and you were too judgmental in your language. Try to ask more questions and understand your patient's goals before you start jumping into recommendations. So you need to give them some coaching. Specifically, it's not enough to just tell them, oh, that's wrong, try again. You need to tell them why it's wrong and what they should be looking for. If you give people feedback and they understand, oh, you didn't ask the right question, you didn't intervene in time, you were too judgmental, you showed favoritism to one employee, you made a nasty comment to a patient, and now they don't trust you. That is feedback that it's frustrating, but it tends to be good frustrating. It's satisfying to get it right, and people are more tolerant of that.
There's a lot of psychology involved in, thinking in their perspective and, framing the question. I also like the way you said, if they are somebody who's starting their career, there's obviously going to be a lot of support for them because they probably require that more than anything. So yeah. So what are some of the common pitfalls that L&D professionals tend to do when they are designing an SBL program, and how can they avoid it?
I think that when people start out with branching scenarios in particular, it is pretty tempting. Lots of people for their first one create a scenario that's pretty linear. You have one decision, you get a couple of consequences, and then you immediately get on the path. Kathy Moore calls those control freak scenarios, because the instructional designer is really in control of the whole thing. You force them back on the path. I will say that that's in game design, that's called a gauntlet. Karl Kopp calls them a constrained branching. We have no uniform terminology in the field of L&D, so you may see any of those terms. They are more linear. I think that those can be okay. There are situations in which I might use them, especially if I'm teaching somebody who is a novice and I want it to be extremely friendly. I don't want them to go down the wrong path at all. I want them to make a decision, get some feedback, and immediately put them back on the right path and make that a friendly gauntlet in game design. But for most training, that ends up being pretty simple. And if we're trying to teach a more complex skill, it probably doesn't reflect the reality of that skill very well. It's an okay place to start. When you're first learning how to do it, it is often structure. The very first branching scenario that I wrote 20 years ago absolutely uses that structure, where I had 4 decisions, you got feedback, and they all went right back on the path, and the second decision was not affected at all by what happened in the first decision. I think the other place where people get stuck is sort of the opposite problem of having the branching structure too simple, which is you have a decision, it goes out to 3 things. And then the next decision, each of those goes out to 3 things, and each of those goes out to 3 things. And all of a sudden, you've got 80 slides, and the learner has only made 3 or 4 choices, and it's grown out of control. And I think that it's very easy to get into something where the structure is simply unmanageable. Especially when people are first learning how to do branching scenarios and not used to, right? So I do suggest to people that they start with something smaller. When I teach branching scenarios, we often, that first branching scenario that people create is often, maybe 15 to 25 passages or slides. It's not huge, but that's a good structure to give people a little sense of it without it growing exponentially out of control. So using techniques like cutting off the wrong paths and making those shorter, letting people correct their mistakes and get back on the right path, reusing choices, using a branch and bottleneck structure where you branch out for a while, but then there is some bottleneck decision where you definitely get to, that helps kind of trim off all of the side paths for a bit, and then you go back on. That can be helpful. All of those things can help manage the structure so that it streamlines things without it getting too far out of down all of those alternate paths where it gets overwhelming, and it can get overwhelming pretty fast.
It can be overwhelming for the creator as well, who is doing. So I think that's a great advice that you said. What are some of the interesting projects that you've worked on, like some of the interesting SBL projects?
So I've done several branching scenarios. I worked with an organization that was creating interactive videos for healthcare situations, so nutrition counselors and nurses and home visitors. And I've loved all of those projects because it's cool to be part of a team where, frankly, there's no way that I could do all of this live video work on my own, right? Hiring actors and, professional lighting and professional videographers, and having a team where I get to script out these branching scenarios and provide them a script, and then I get to see what real actors do with it. Those have been super cool to see that come to life. Like that's just a really neat experience. And I love those ones that have been, like the training the nutrition counselors or the groups doing helping women with postpartum anxiety and postpartum depression, where we did some scenarios of how do you talk to moms in those situations and how do you help them, where there's not a right answer necessarily. There's maybe some best answers and some okay answers, and there are definitely some wrong things to do. But even in a situation of a postpartum psychosis and a dangerous situation, to have some of that's been really cool stuff. And again, to script those out and to see those, I think those are really fun. I think that I've done some others that are certainly the practical things of troubleshooting things of bulldozer safety, and here's the dashboard, and this alarm is going off and this light's on lit up on the dashboard. Is this a stop the machine right now and call in, or is this a finish your shift and go back to take it to maintenance at the end of your shift kind of problem? Those are kind of cool too, right? So I think that that can all be fun. I think I've also, it is fun to, all of these are I really do think the branching scenarios are fun to write. So in some respects, kind of regardless of the topic, they can be pretty interesting, because I like talking to subject matter experts in all these different fields, and right, you get to talk to people and interview them and learn all of their things and find out about different fields. It is always part of the fun of working in L&D and working as an instructional designer, and then trying to put yourself in the shoes of somebody in all of these different roles, of researchers getting federal grants to do biotechnology research, or teachers in a classroom, or paramedics answering an emergency call, or nurses at a hospital who are helping new moms, or right, all of those things. That's you get to do all of those things, and all of that can be fun, even if it's not fancy multimedia. But I will say that the video scenarios are always super cool to have the extra fancy multimedia.
Wow, that's nice. I think every day is a new experience with the L&D, I guess. So the last question is, AI has been a buzzword in the L&D industry for some time now, and what are the areas where you have used AI in scenario-based learning, and how can we effectively use it to make our process more simpler or faster?
So I see a couple of ways that AI can be useful right now. One is just initially coming up with story ideas. I think that's often a place where people get stuck, right? It is always a challenge to get past the blank page. And so, okay, well, I'm working on, I need to create a scenario for teaching this skill. Give me 5 ideas for a story. And any of the LLMs, the large language models, ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini, any of those can frankly brainstorm ideas for you pretty well right now. I think that it is also sometimes good, often when we work with our subject matter experts, we can get the ideal path, we can get the right answers pretty well. That'll be documented somewhere. The figuring out what mistakes to make good, plausible, wrong answers, usually I find when I talk to SMEs, I get some of those, but not all of them. And so in the past, I've always just kind of used my imagination and guessed what it would be based on, yes, I've done research or gone and looked at, well, what do people complain about in online communities when they're talking about this topic, right? There's ways to do it. But I do like using AI for, okay, here's the question, here's the right answer. I want one wrong answer to be related to this mistake, because I know it's this mistake from the SME. And then give me one other wrong answer. And it can help me brainstorm a wrong answer. I always have to edit the text afterwards. It's never quite right. But it's certainly getting better. And if I give it some samples of like, here's the last 2 decisions I wrote in the branching scenario, and now I'm stuck on this one, help me come up with the choices for where we are on this path. I also am finding it helpful in helping me fill in knowledge on things. Like I made a project management scenario where I was setting it in a software development. This is a sample for my blog, so I don't have an actual SME to work with. So I had the AI generate somebody like, well, what would the problems be? Oh, something with the architecture. Cool, sounds good to me. I don't actually know if it's 100% accurate, and in real life, if this was a client project, that would definitely have to go to a SME to verify. But, you know, in general topics, it tends to be pretty good. The more specialized your topic, the less good it's going to be at that. But it's pretty good at coming up with some of those details. Another one where it's research and things where I don't understand. I'm like, oh, I need a little backstory for a character that has these things, and the science of this is way beyond my ability right now. So give me like, what's something that somebody could be researching with a federal grant in this area? Okay, cool. I can use that, and we'll just to give me a couple of little character details, a little character backstory. I thought it was great for that. The other place I'm using AI right now is experimenting with generating character images. Midjourney can now do multiple poses of a character image. I have had some successes and some failures with that. There are still certainly problems with it, but it is something that I'm certainly exploring right now. So I think that's sort of another area where the AI with image generation and you know, 6 to 12 months from now, it'll all be better than it is right now.
It is better than whatever it was in 2022 when ChatGPT came out. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And also, AI is a very collaborative process. The more you give it, the better the results you get out of it. So yeah. With that, we have come to the end of the session 2, and we are going to my favorite session, that is the rapid fire round. It's the third part. So quick questions and quick answers. So I'll start firing away. So in your opinion, what is the one skill that every L&D professional must have?
I think that L&D professionals overall do need to be good writers. I think it's an underestimated skill. Even in the age of AI, if you're not a good writer, you don't know how to fix what ChatGPT gives you.
That's great. What's the most favorite and the least favorite part of your profession?
I mentioned earlier that I really do like working with experts in all of these fields and constantly having new stuff to learn. I have a low tolerance for boredom, and I really do like having new things to learn and to work on all the time. So I like that learning, and I like that variety. My least favorite things, I have definitely not enjoyed being a people manager. It's part of why I'm a company of one person. I was a people manager. I was an assistant director at one point in my career. It was like, nope, I'm gonna go back to being an instructional designer because this is lousy and I am miserable. So I don't want to be a people man. I actually like making courses. I mean, that's part of the thing, is I like the writing and the creating, and I think that I don't want to spend all my time in meetings and managing personalities. I find it very draining.
Also, we have some particular ideas that we have, and we want to execute it in a particular way, and it's easier when we are alone and we can execute it easily. So yeah. So what is your favorite go-to place to update yourself about scenario-based learning? It can be like newsletters or forums or like communities, anything.
Ooh. I think that is somewhat of a challenge, because I will say that there are a couple of other experts who I do definitely read and follow their things. Carl Kopp, who definitely has a bunch on gamification, but also teaches about branching scenarios and has a branching scenario course on LinkedIn. I think his work's really good. Clark Aldrich's work on short sims, which are he will define it as not a branching scenario, but there's certainly, we'll say, a lot of branching scenario elements, and he's figured out how to make it systematic. I think that there's a lot of that. Kathy Moore is kind of the original branching scenario person, and who introduced me to Twine, which is the tool that I use for building things. So I think that that's good. I think Ruth Clark has a book on scenario-based e-learning that has been a reference and that I refer to. I think there are also things within sort of games and other sources that I do sometimes look at, not necessarily any particular one that I look at a lot, but I do kind of keep an eye on some of that, or in the Twine community or the interactive fiction community, I do kind of pull things from that sometimes. I think Miranda Verswivelin will be the last one I'll mention. She's definitely less known than all of the other people I mentioned, but she's been working on her dissertation on, what did she call it? Interactive stories for learning is what she's calling them, is to differentiate, to have a clearer definition and a clearer term than the branching scenario and scenario-based learning, which are muddy definitions. So she's been doing some good work about narrative design, and I'm looking forward to getting to read her dissertation, because I think she's doing interesting research about what makes branching scenarios effective.
Wow, those are some great resources that you've told our audience. I will also surely go check out some of these pieces. So, yeah. What's one thing you wish you had known in the beginning of your career?
I wish that I had known at the beginning of my career that, I've been doing branching scenarios for a long time, but I didn't actually, and I've been blogging for a long time. I started blogging in 2006, so I really was I'd only been an instructional designer for 2.5 years at the point that I started blogging. I didn't start writing about branching scenarios until much later, because since I'd sort of figured it all out as I was going along, I kind of thought that they were obvious and that everybody had figured out all of these same things, and that I didn't have anything interesting to say about it. And it wasn't until I was actually coaching a team creating a branching scenario and saw some of the places they were getting stuck. It's like, oh, okay, there actually are things that I can teach other people, and I do have something valuable to say and to share about this. And that then got me talking about it and explaining some of the things that I'd coached, some of the problems, and then obviously has grown out to that's the thing that I'm known for now. I was definitely doing it, I just wasn't writing about it because I thought it was too easy, and I didn't trust myself that I had something valuable to say.
Wow. So the last question is, so what is the one piece of information that audience who are watching this video, if you're thinking about doing SBL, this is your takeaway, like something like a takeaway. What's the one thing that you're going to tell them?
The one thing I want people to take away is to not feel like you have to start by creating an enormous complex branching scenario as your first project. Start with some 1-question or 2-question mini scenarios, get some practice writing little scenarios and writing questions, get some practice there. Then you can start building some smaller scenarios, and don't be afraid to, combine some scenarios, some mini scenarios and branching scenarios with other forms of training too, so that you can conserve your resources, do some linear training, and then have the practice be that branching scenario at the end. Do some little practice exercises throughout, and then have that one big combined practice, so that you aren't don't try and do a 40-minute branching scenario exercise. That's way too much work, especially when you're first getting started. Do smaller bits of it and then build your skills, and don't feel like it's all or nothing.
Wow, that's a great advice. I think we have come to the end of the session. Thank you so much, Christy. It was such a valuable session. I really learned a lot about scenario-based learning, which I had really not known earlier prior to this. So thank you so much for that. And I really hope the audience also find it very useful.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.